What are some deeply unsettling facts that you know? In 1933, a doctor named Carl Tanzler raided the tomb of a female patient with whom he'd become obsessed and stole her body. He lived with the corpse for 7 years. As the body fell apart, he attached the corpse's bones together with wire and coat hangers and fitted the face with glass eyes. He was only caught when someone saw him dancing with the corpse in front of an open window. Hey, how about we ditch this musty looking mausoleum and head back to my place? I'll take that as a yes. The little girl who voiced Ducky in the Land Before Time movies was murdered by her father when she was 11, in part because he was jealous of her success. Her father also murdered her mother in front of her beforehand. All whales eventually lose the energy to surface for oxygen, so they basically just sink and drown. These are known as whale falls. A whale will fall down to the ocean depth, its carcass creating a transitional ecosystem for the critters below. It's a rich ecosystem. New species of marine life have been discovered by observing these whale falls. It's a great example of the circle of life. After the bombing of Hiroshima, black rain that contained radioactive material fell, and many didn't realize it until it was too late. Also, according to my Japanese professor, they didn't even have a word for the atomic bomb at the time. I unfortunately can't remember what she said they called it instead. They called it Picadon-Ike, lightning thunder. For everyone who immediately thought of Pikachu, you aren't far off the mark. It's an onomatopoeia. The picker is the shining or flash of the lightning and on is the boom. Pikachu is shining plus the sound a mouse makes, kinda like calling an animal a flash squeak, which could be a scave name. Anders Breivik was told to have laughed when massacring kids in Utøya. 21-year-old girl from South Carolina had a psychotic episode after using meth. Pulled both of her eyes out and crushed them in her hands because she thought she needed to in order to save the world. I believe people saw it happen. Edit. Typo. Maybe it worked. I would hate for it to be for nothing, so I'll just pretend it saved us all in 2012 or 2020 IDK. Thanks. Girl on meth. If a hamster manages to get its hands on your body, if you are dead, it will use chunks of your skin, hair and other stuff to make a nest, leaving a very bloody and messy scene behind. I missed the if there and thought they would somehow kill me lol. In the Battle of Verdun, over 1 million artillery shells were fired onto a 19-mile wide stretch of land in the first 12 hours. If you were lucky enough to survive until then, the sound alone was enough to drive you insane. Of the 800,000 casualties at Verdun, an estimated 70% were caused by artillery. The Germans launched 2 million shells during their opening bombardment, more than in any engagement in history to that point, and the two sides eventually fired between 40 and 60 million shells over the next 10 months. That's insane. Mummy Brown is a paint hue partially made up of ground up Egyptian mummies. There are paintings made of dead people. Adding on to this, besides Mummy Brown or Egyptian Brown, we used to eat mummies because of their supposed medical properties. That's why there are so few of them left. Who the fuck is back? Quote we. You got a mouse in your pocket. Veteran criminals in the gulags would recruit native prisoners for their escape attempts called cows for the sole purpose of eating them when they ran out of food in the Siberian wilderness, also known as walking supply. Paradoxical undressing. It happens during the last stages of hypothermia, as your nerves are damaged. The person removes all of their clothing in freezing temperatures because they feel irrationally hot. People will also sometimes attempt to dig into the ground in the final stages, terminal burrowing. Just reading this, and I wanna hold my breath. The astonishing fatality rates that can be found in so many battles in the First World War weren't accidents or unfortunate byproducts of the technology, they were factored into the battle plans. By the nature of attritional warfare, it was calculated how many men would be lost every week and commanders drew up enough reinforcement to replace them. This was called normal wastage. I remember reading about the German plan at Verdun. The idea was to attack a target the French couldn't afford to abandon and force them to throw more and more men into the meat grinder to hopefully deplete the French army. It almost worked. To some regiments of the French army reported an over 100% casualty rate. Edit. I'm gonna chuck this here since so many people are asking. It's possible for the casualty rate to be over 100% because when men die or become wounded they get replaced to keep the unit at full strength, and if those men become casualties as well, it's possible for a unit of say 1000 men to suffer 1200 casualties over a particularly long and bloody battle like Verdun. Ike Falkenhayn's original plan was just to take Verdun, as it was indeed an important piece of the French defensive apparatus. After it failed, he was like, man, I just wanted to see them suffer anyway. But the attack was indeed a failure. Germany's mistake in this battle was to always leave the same troops in Verdun. If you were a Lancer in Verdun on 18th of February and didn't get killed or injured, chances were you stayed there until 21st of November. France on the other hand constantly swapped divisions, moving in fresh troops for a few weeks, then moving them back in a quieter part of the front once the men were worn out by the fighting. Around 70% of all poilus at least spent some time in Verdun. An injury to the brain can turn you into a completely different person, as well as removing your ability to comprehend that it did. It doesn't even have to be a particularly bad one either. It just has to hit the right part of your brain. I was thinking about Michael Schumacher recently and this came to mind. My dad had brain surgery for a tumor and his personality changed immediately. He lost all his social rules and became the friendly, joking, gregarious salesman he'd always been at work, but without any of the depth of personality. He remembered everything and still did research for almost a year after that, but his social rules and any kind of deep personality were just gone. Doctor called it compensating for the loss by filling in with the salesman bullshit. And that's a very salesman thing to do. I've been in sales for 35 years and know the drill. It was hard on mom to take care of him because, as she said, this is not my husband. This is the salesman people see when he's away from me. Shit eventually went to more normal brain cancer sickness and he eventually passed after a year. It was so weird to watch and know that there was a whole part of him that the surgeon scooped out that day. My best friend of 20 years turned out to be a child molester and none of us knew until my other friend's daughter came forward having been a victim. Found that out months ago. Still not okay. Now none of my friends talk. It might be a good idea to talk again as like a damn support group, damn. Not to pretend I know what you're going through. Tumors can grow teeth. Yep. They are called teratomas and can even form hair, skin. Some cases report eyes. And one that I heard developed brain cells. Really creepy. Hollop. Brain cells. Can that mean Harvard here I come? Japan did some horrible experiments on people during WW2, Unit 731, vivisection, shattering people's frostbitten limbs, biological warfare, etc. It's all quite horrific, and don't recommend anyone without a stomach for horror to read about it. Also, after the war, the people who ran it were never tried as war criminals because the US decided to keep them and their research under wraps so that they could get a hand up on the Soviets. Fun fact, in China today, where these experiments happened, when a room is messy, instead of saying it looks like a pigsty they'll say it looks like the Japanese invaded. X. Parents to child, clean your room. It looks like the Japanese invaded in here. In extreme cases of scurvy, your scars break down and old wounds reopen. Collagen keeps scars together and that collagen maintains itself throughout our lives. But without vitamin C, that process begins to halt and the collagen breaks down. Eat your fruits and veggies, folks. The weirdest thing about scurvy is how it's showing up in well-off people. Some modern diets cut out all fruits and vegetables, leading to very low vitamin C. People then start getting weird symptoms, like bleeding gums. There was a guy at my mate's uni who subsisted on nothing but cheese and bacon rolls and cheap cordial for a semester. Went to the document. Doc took ages to diagnose him. Because, naturally, who the fuck gets scurvy in the middle of Brisbane, Australia, in the 21st century? Edit. Yes, I'm well aware of the urban legend. That also doesn't preclude it from happening in real life. If you're telling me that it's an urban myth that uni students have shitty nutrition, well, plus I met the guy, Scurvy Bob. He fucking hated the name Bob instead of his preferred diminutive Rob. But, let's face it, Bob sounded more 18th century piratical. He was fine with the scurvy bit. Lol, reminds me of a friend at uni who would buy one of those meter-long baguettes and a packet of ham every day. make a giant sandwich, then spend all day eating it for every meal. There was also another who used to buy ground sourdough loaves, open them with a hole in the top, and put an entire fish and chips in it, put the top back on, and eat it like a giant burger. Lol, now I'm imagining The Simpsons, when Homer was trying to finish a 10-foot sandwich for days on end, and ended up getting sick. They used to not use anesthesia on babies when they would do surgery. In the 1800s, a lot of dentures were made using the teeth of dead soldiers. People used to scavenge battlefields pulling the teeth from the dead. After the Battle of Waterloo, it was advertised that the teeth were from the battle like it was a novelty. And there were so many teeth available after Waterloo that scavenging for teeth was no longer profitable for those in Europe anyways. It was advertised because the dead were largely young men, and so presumably the teeth were still in decent condition. Like new. One previous owner. Terminal lucidity is the return of mental clarity or memory or consciousness shortly before death. This happens to around 10% of people with dementia. Left square bracket. My grandma was in a care facility for the last year of her life due to dementia. My uncle and mom have a bad relationship and were arguing in her room over what needed to be done for her, and she yelled at them in the most conscious manner. Chuck. Edie. Stop fighting this instant. And then passed right there. She didn't recognize any of us for weeks before this. Good to know why that happened. Those are the most mom last words ever. She wasn't even one of the people arguing, but got the ultimate last word. Impressive. The world's most prolific living serial killer is a man called Pedro Lopez. He was convicted of the killing of 110 girls, but he claims he has raped and murdered over 300. His current whereabouts are unknown. There's a rumor that the family members of his victims tracked him down after his release and killed him, but that's never been confirmed. Wait, so he was let out of prison? There's the right follow-up question. Man, it's even worse. He was released from prison in Ecuador, and then later on imprisoned in Colombia for another murder, and then released again. The symptoms for a heart attack can be a lot milder than what is shown in movies or TV shows. I have seen people coming in with some discomfort and then passing due to a massive infarction when we did the angiogram quite a few years ago. My grandma took my grandpa to see their GP, and while at his appointment the doctor noticed the symptoms of a heart attack on my grandma. The doctor had her sent to the ER. She had a massive heart attack, and she said she only felt mildly nauseous. She's most likely only alive because the GP used to be a cardiothoracic surgeon, but gave it up to be a small town doctor. My grandma walked around with a heart infarct for months due to nobody recognizing it and her being too proud to admit she wasn't feeling well. There really needs to be more awareness about the less obvious symptoms of heart attacks. A friend of mine just felt like she had indigestion and a bit of a something is stuck feeling in her esophagus. I've actually read that symptoms are different for women, and that's why we don't usually spot it. All your stories are about women as well. A convicted rapist managed to abduct an 11-year-old girl and keep her as a sex slave for 18 years, even forcing her to bear his children, all while being monitored by parole officers who remained clueless to what was going on for nearly 2 decades. Her kidnapping happened exactly 30 years ago today. His wife was in on the whole thing. Another thing I've wondered, how TF do these people find each other? I could kinda see it nowadays, but before the internet, did he take her on a date and ask her, so what are your feelings in kidnapping and imprisonment of young women? Right? Forget kidnapping. I was nervous to ask my girlfriend if she liked Lord of the Rings when we first met. I was nervous to ask my girlfriend if she liked Lord of the Rings when we first met. Well, LOTR is okay. How do you feel about kidnapping? Match made in heaven. Seemingly 100% healthy people with literally no reason to believe they would have any reason to can still spontaneously drop dead. Cherish every day. Had a friend who was in a Pokemon Go group chat with me who just up and died. We were talking about the event that was going on, and he stopped responding. Everyone thought he was just busy and carried on the conversation without him. A few hours later someone in the chat said he died. Just walked into his kitchen and fell over dead. Everyone named a ho after him, since that was his Pokemon Go buddy. It was the first time a lot of us had experienced sudden death like that, so we were all really shaken for a while. He was only in his mid-30s. Did he die from a health complication? Or just, what? He had a really bad leg injury that we suspect wasn't healing, right, and that a blood clot formed and killed him. But there wasn't an autopsy, so nobody knows for sure. Also, if you saw my first response about murder, just ignore it. I deleted it because I thought I was responding to a different comment. But IDK if it was successfully removed, lol. When you blush so does your stomach. Thank you. Weird nerve stuff. Very cool. Weird nerve stuff like how sometimes when I scratch at an itch slash spot slash whatever on the front of my waist, spots on the back of my shoulders will itch. Thoracic innervation is weird. The Matthews and the Hart bridges in Jacksonville are about to fail. The pilings in the river do not touch bottom. I'm a commercial diver and I refuse to drive on these bridges. Here you can read terminology and bridge ratings for every bridge in Florida. On the latest report, Matthews has a health index of 96, but a sufficiency rating of 44, while the Hart is 90 and 30. That's my hometown. I hate those bridges. I hate knowing that several people I love drive over those bridges on a constant basis. They're just one more thing on the list if reasons I don't like Jacksonville. YTF are those bridges still open for public? Still considered to be in fair condition by the Florida Department of Transportation? I live here and avoid them as well. It's a mess. Historically, our bridges have a grade of like a B compared to a C nationally. We have a lower number of structurally deficient bridges than other states of the country, said Kathleen Ruverak, Vice President of the Florida section of the American Society of Civil Engineers. This logic is absolutely terrifying. There were Holocaust survivors that died shortly after being liberated because their body couldn't handle the increased calories when they were fed by the soldiers that freed them. This is called drug-feeding syndrome for anyone curious. One of my foster doggos was at high risk of this, and it was horrendous, withholding food from a dog who was nearly starved to death. It took months of painstakingly measuring out her food and giving tiny portions every few hours, weekly vet visits. And by the time she was healthy enough for adoption, we'd just fallen so hard in love, so now she's our beautiful healthy baby Maggie. Foster fail. Lovely. Also why I could never foster. I'd just end up with a house full of animals. My GF just wanted to visit a kitten. I was telling her that with a dog already we should maybe slow down, and she just wanted to visit. I told her we weren't getting a cat. The little guy was only a couple months old. Too young to be neutered for another month or so. He crawled into my lap, started purring, and fell asleep. I had to take him home after that. The USA has lost 6 nuclear weapons that were never found. It's worth noting that nuclear weapons don't stay fresh for long without proper maintenance. A weapon that was lost decades ago couldn't detonate anymore by its own. You'd have to first, some of all fears it, by bribing some Russian nuclear scientists to restore it to working order for you, which, while possible, isn't a skill set super easy to come by for your average garden variety terrorist. The Junko Furuta case. Reading about it gave me nightmares. She was held captive for 44 days and basically tortured by her classmates. Some parents knew what was going on, but did nothing about it. Since the criminals were juveniles at the time, they are free today. TW. Abuse. Rape. It terrifies me that people like this are born every day. If you are new to TattleTale TV, please subscribe. We have new videos every day. Stay tuned for more coming up next.